Belarus and Russia. 9,000 additional deaths from cancer, nothing more. This is official data from so-called Chernobyl Forum, which formed by International Atomic Energy Agency and World Health Organization. My estimation, it's going from absolutely different way. We do not based on unclear dose estimation. Dose, it's absolutely, from my point of view, it's not scientific based dose, which practically dose is possible correct estimate only in medical facility, only in so it's impossible to to apply dose estimation to wide population of Belarus, wide population of Russia. All unclear, unprecise calculation. So I try to avoid those, and I try to compare population in the heavy polluted territory. Pollution of radioactive pollution we can measure, we can exact measure what the and immediately we can detect this one territory, for example, Brest area, Brest province in Russia, heavy contaminated after Chernobyl, and several other. So when we compare heavy contaminated territory with less contaminated territory, we have differences, and this difference, because these differences belong to we count as impact of Chernobyl, because this territory absolutely equal with economical sense, with social sense, with ethnic sense, equal, different only by irradiation. So based on this, it's not my calculation. Calculation have been published a group of statistics and epidemiologists from St. Petersburg. We had Professor Khudoley. The basic estimation was differences between 6 heavy polluted territory and less polluted territory. It was about 60,000 additional deaths during 15 years. They have data, and they apply this data for Belarus and for Russia, or for Belarus and for Ukraine, and the result was 215 or 211 additional deaths for 15 years. My task was to extrapolate this biological data for all contaminated territory, because you have to, I have to mention that in Belarus, Russia and Ukraine received about 42% of Chernobyl fallout. All other Chernobyl radionuclide going to Western Europe or other countries, for North Africa, North America, Asia, and so on. And when I calculate this arithmetical, of course it's not precise, of course but level of death toll more than 1 million. If you not only for 15 years but for 25 years, maybe close to 1.5 million than 9,000 deaths which I mentioned before.
And are there some new data? What's new the last few years? Nobody have a data for the last 2 years. We have basic data for this for my calculation. The data have been published in 2006 in St. Petersburg. For 2007, this basic calculation by Khudoley, Professor Khudoley, and concern 15 years from 1990 till to 2004. This is basic data, and all other my calculation, my prediction, and so. Now the accident in Japan. Are there some estimations how many victims will be there?
I think we have to ask about this Professor C.Busby, who is here. He made this calculation. His calculation such, based on the data from Chernobyl, from real impact, it looked like that in the area in 200 kilometers around Fukushima, it will be during next 50 years. Next 50 years, it will be 420,000 additional deaths, and half of them it will be during next 10 years. Mm-hmm. But I strongly ask you to ask C.Busby about this.
Okay.
as you are a biologist, now a lot of impact is in the sea. What do you think? What consequences?
Consequences. It will be very negative consequences of sea life, but nobody knows exactly what the scale and geographical scale and marine life scale, because we know that mollusks and other algae and some other marine sea organisms concentrate radionuclide. Concentrate. This we call it bioaccumulation or bioconcentration. The scale of concentration 100,000. If you have one unit in water, 100,000 more it will be in mollusk. Maybe 1,000,000 more radionuclide will be. So it is such a process of bioconcentration. It means that all marine life, I think 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers from Fukushima, have been dangerous because they have to concentrate, multiply this pollution, contamination, radioactive contamination. The big question: how, because sea current going through Japan to north to south, how a big distance will translate, will
damage
going the radionuclide. Nobody knows, but it looked like several thousand kilometers. So we need to establish a very strict monitoring, radio monitoring for all fish products from Far East, from North Pacific, because it North Pacific now is on the threat.
So that's a big difference to Chernobyl, do you think?
Till to now, nobody knows exactly what we have. In beginning of April. In beginning of April, all calculations, not all, but several calculations show that compared with Chernobyl fallout, in Fukushima we have about 10% of radionuclide compared with Chernobyl. But in Fukushima we have a very populated area around of Fukushima. Very populated area. It may be impact even so considerably less amount. C.Busby here, what? Catch him. Chris, don't, come. About Fukushima, your estimation for Fukushima.
Oh yes, we did a big analysis, which I'm going to give tomorrow, of the death toll so far from Fukushima. We used the data from the International Atomic Energy Agency and also from the Japanese ministry who measure the radiation there. And so this is a minimum. We calculated the cancer risk, the cancer toll, cancer yield in the 100-kilometer zone from the reactor, and it was about between 100 and 200,000 cancers in the next 10 years, and that's a prediction. And if you take the next zone out, because there are a lot of people there, that's the point. The population of that zone, we worked out it was about 3.3 million who live inside the 100 kilometers. And between the 100 kilometers and 200 kilometers, because it's closer to Tokyo, there's a place called Ibaraki prefecture. There's another 7.3 million, I think it is, in that zone. So you get about another similar amount, because the dose is less, but the people are more, see. So overall, in those two zones, from 0 to 200 kilometers, the total toll is approximately 200 to 400,000. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, I almost stopped myself because it's such an enormous number. But that's what the figures tell us, and they're based on two separate ways of calculating it. The first way is based on some very clever epidemiological work done by Martin Tondell in Sweden, looking at the Chernobyl accident yield in northern Sweden. And you can then use his figures to calculate the cancer yield on the basis of the contamination on the ground. But the other way is to use the ICRP model and to assume various things about the concentrations of different substances which are being emitted from the reactor, but generally the same things that came out of Chernobyl. And they give roughly the same answer.
And after the 10 years?
After the 10 years, well, effectively what you have is you have about the same again over the 50 years, because the ECRR model calculates it for the whole of 50 years, whereas the other model is for just the 10 years.
But there has to be taken into picture the question of possible underestimation.
Oh yes, well, that's right. There is almost certainly underestimation, but I want to be very, very cautious about this. The reason there's underestimation is because the International Atomic Energy Agency are probably lying. If you take the dose data, it's possible to take the dose. The dose is what you measure with a Geiger counter, and they measure it in microsieverts per hour. If you take that dose, you can, in principle, using physics, you can calculate the concentration of substances on the ground. And there are plenty of relationships that enable you to do this pretty accurately. And what you do when you do that sum, when you take the Japanese Geiger counter data and you use that to calculate the contamination on the ground, you get there's about 5 times more contamination than the IAEA is saying there is, you see. But I took the IAEA data to be the baseline for the calculation, so probably it's going to be worse than. And of course I haven't taken into consideration Tokyo and the other prefectures and so on, because they're certainly contaminated, and all of this stuff is going into the sea, and that will go up and down the coast with the tides, and it will contaminate the sediment along the shoreline. And we know from studies that we've done in the Irish Sea, which is contaminated from Sellafield, and also we're beginning studies in the Baltic Sea, which is very contaminated from Chernobyl and from weapons fallout.
The most radioactive in the world.
Please.
But what the studies show is that people who live close to these shorelines have about a 30% increased risk of cancer. So you're going to get this effect all the way along the coast. And I haven't even brought in the fact that they shouldn't eat the fish and seafood and so on, because the Japanese have a very, very highly concentrated seafood diet. So the whole thing is a nightmare, and it's not getting any better.
And should there be some measures by other organization who should take some measures now?
This is an international problem, and it's a problem particularly associated with the nuclear industry. So the international nuclear industry and the front end of the international nuclear industry is the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a UN organization, and it was set up in order to promote safe nuclear power. And so I would see that its remit is absolutely certainly to take control of the situation in Japan, and to help the Japanese, or even to put the Japanese to one side now, and to put international money into this global problem, because it is a global problem. It is not a Japanese problem. It's a problem that came about because the Japanese were encouraged by the nuclear industry to invest in nuclear power. Their reactors were made, or either made by American company GEC, or else they were licensed by GEC to Toshiba. And those particular reactors were always considered to be quite worrisome. And it's almost certain that reactor number 2 has melted down quite apart from anything to do with cooling. That in fact the earthquake itself fractured the pipes, and this was a design study accident that was drawn attention to by the people who designed it in the 70s. So it was, if you like, an accident waiting to happen, and therefore the people, if anyone is responsible, it's the international nuclear industry, and they should foot the bill. And the IAEA should take control now on behalf of the world, on behalf of even people here in Germany, because it's going to affect everybody in the world. Because however small the doses, the more people you have, the more cancer you will get.
Do you have any estimation how the effect will be in Europe? Will there be some effect?
I'm sure there will be some effect, but it will be very, very small and hardly measurable. Because very thankfully, unlike with Chernobyl, which was in the middle of Europe, this is a very, very long way away, and there's a very large Pacific Ocean, and then the whole of the United States, and then a large Atlantic Ocean. Although it can come over the poles, it's still a very, very long way away, and by the time it gets it will be very dilute. And I think the measurements that we've seen so far show that that is the case. And those concentrations of radioiodine that are measured in the water now are so low that it would be impossible to detect any increase in cancer. It would be 1 in 10 million, something like that. So I don't think it is a problem. I don't think people in Europe need to take tablets of iodine or any of those things just yet.
And
of course, something
China
might happen. Well, China and Korea are upwind. Essentially, they're up weather of this. Because of the rotation of the Earth, the general trend in direction, although things do go in the other direction, the general trend in direction is from west to east. And so I'm sure that China and Korea will suffer some sort of pollution, but it's impossible to say how high that level will be. One thing that has to be watched out, though, is aeroplanes, because the airport in Tokyo is right in the pathway of the plume. We've modelled these plumes using various sophisticated computer models, and what they do show is that airport has become quite severely contaminated. And I've been contacted by various airline pilots, who are worried about the contamination, and that is significant because these aero engines, they just suck air in, and there are various filters inside the engines, and so they will become contaminated. They'll fly to other parts of the world. This stuff sticks to the wings of the aircraft, and so when it lands and the wheels come down and so forth, you will get contamination being shifted around the world. So I would think there was probably a case for investigating that and for banning flights from that airport, closing that airport down. If people want to come from Japan, they should fly from Osaka or somewhere fairly remote from this event.
And one step back to Chernobyl, last question. What is the most important lack of data from Chernobyl?
Most important?
What data are missing?
What data is missing
what
from
data
Chernobyl?
is missing from Chernobyl? Maybe if you look now to Japan, is there something you would need now?
No, what we know now from Chernobyl is that these levels of radioactivity in these particular kinds of material are extraordinarily dangerous for living systems. The problem is that the international community is acting as if that isn't the case, because the risk model that they use is one that goes right back to 1952, and it's a sort of physics-based risk model based on the atomic bomb and external radiation, and it's just extremely basic. And so although it might be able to predict the risk from having an X-ray or some kind of external exposure, and there's even some doubt about that, it certainly is absolutely incorrect by several orders of magnitude when dealing with these internal radiation exposures. And Professor Yablokov here has been one of the main people drawing attention to that through his collection of all of the Russian language, the Russian literature papers investigating this study. Because in the West, those who regulate exposure to radionuclides have totally ignored the Chernobyl disaster. Mainly, I think, because the control of all of this has been in the hands of the International Atomic Energy Agency rather than the World Health Organization or the doctors.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
One of the lessons from Chernobyl, one of the important lessons, we need to have independent from state, from government, and independent from nuclear industry system of measurement of radiation. Independent, civil system, scientific or non-government organization. We have to have such a system because they constantly conceal the data. It's very important. Just now I look for a newspaper from American and Japanese newspaper. They call, oh please, all people who around of Fukushima immediately report when you will be 2 weeks ago, how many minutes you spent on the open air, how many milk you drink during this 2 weeks, how many water you consume. It's ridiculous, it's absolutely ridiculous, because this data will be placed on the base of the estimation of dose. It's such an unscientific approach, such an incorrect data. Yeah. But my opinion, I agree with Professor Busby that it needs as soon as possible to enlarge evacuation zone, and using the Chernobyl experience, try to organize it. It's obvious. It's impossible to come back to pre-Fukushima time. It's impossible. It's betray to people to make dream that it's possible to back to previous life. It never happened. It never. Chernobyl drastically turned all life. It happened in this part of Japan also. We need to preparing. We know a lot of measurement, a lot of method to organize some agriculture in some not so heavy polluted, but some average polluted area. It's possible to organize, but not, of course, not vegetable, but maybe some fuel, some reprocessing some milk. I saw the picture. They
throw away a lot of milk. It's possible to reprocessing this milk. It's possible to avoid the radiation. So it needs to learn a lesson from Chernobyl.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.